Meanwhile, Nico Jackson, I was going to ask you about the possibility of him moving to Newcastle, but just before we came on air, I saw rumours suggesting he could be going to Villa, James.
Yeah, so those are the two clubs leading the race. I think Villa are, well, I'd say Villa are slightly ahead in terms of, I think the player's preference is probably to go to Villa, but there's a real issue for Villa with PSR, and Chelsea value Jackson at more than £60 million, rightly or wrongly, and Villa just can't afford to pay that. So I think what they're trying to do at the moment is come up with some sort of creative payment plan, whether it's loan with an obligation or with a significant loan fee, or they can stagger the payments in a way that they can make an offer that's acceptable to Chelsea. But I think it's also significant with Chelsea to just say that Nico Jackson and Christopher Nkunku, they're both part of the first team squad. They're not in the sort of infamous bomb squad that there was last season and also exists this year. They are training with the first team. They are considered available for selection. I think if there were injuries to Delap and to João Pedro, I think Nico Jackson would probably play against West Ham, but because of the situation being as it is, he's been left out. Whereas you look at Raheem Sterling and Ben Chilwell, for example, they're not training with the first team. So they're training with the sort of loanee groups and the younger age groups, and that's where they are. They are not part of the setup at all, and they have been told you have got to go. So they kind of just leave the door open a little bit for Jackson and Nkunku, because I think they just sort of see, well, look, if we get to September, we've not had an acceptable offer, we can't ostracise these guys completely, because it's going to be very difficult to reintegrate them in the same way that Craig was talking about Alexander Isak. So it's just a sort of slight distinction there that those two are still considered part of the group in a way that some of the others weren't in the past.
I think Nico Jackson worked with Unai Emery before.
Valencia.
In Spain. At Villarreal, was it not?
Villarreal.
So I think there's a little connection there, whether Unai Emery, who's very good at getting more and more out of players. And of course, Ollie Watkins is there. He didn't. I mean, he's a good player, Ollie Watkins. He had a poorer second half of the season, and obviously John Duran went to Saudi Arabia, so there wasn't really much backup there. Morgan Rogers was the sort of player coming from a deeper position. I don't think it's the greatest signing for either team, to be frank with you. I think they're better than that, particularly Villa, if they want to push back into the Champions League, and of course Newcastle are in the Champions League. But I think a lot of teams are just scratching around now to actually see who's out there.
Yep.
Who's out there that's still got a relatively decent quality. And if Nico Jackson can go somewhere and play like he did in the first half of the season for Chelsea last year, then that's a decent player. But what we know is he kind of reverted back to the means in the second half. What we saw in the first 4 or 5 months of the season from him and Chelsea was really, really good. But again, it depends on the money, because as James said, Villa can't afford to spend big, and I don't think he's really worth what Chelsea are asking.
Are they going to bring anyone else in, James, Chelsea?
Well, okay, so that's a complicated one, because people have sort of forgotten a little bit that they were actually sanctioned by UEFA. And what they have to do to meet the requirements is they have to make a profit on the List A players that were in last season's Conference League squad. So this is quite complicated. So it's not just about who they sell. So some players on that list, for example, João Felix being one such example, he wasn't in that squad last year. So his sale, that 43.7 million you see there, that doesn't count towards the UEFA accounting. So we could talk about this at length and it could get very complicated, but basically Chelsea have to balance their books in a very specific way related to their squad costs. Once they do that, I think they will try to go for Xavi Simons and Alejandro Garnacho. I think those are the two that they're still trying to do, but they can't really move on those two until they've got 3 or 4 out of the door who were in that squad last season, because my understanding is there's still a reasonably big deficit there that they need to recoup through player sales, but related to that list who was in into the Conference League squad last season, not just the squad as a whole.
They're just called Saudi Arabia, weren't they, James? Normal come the end of the transfer window?
Well, or they could, call their parent club up and inflate some fees that way, I suppose. That's the allegation that a lot of the other rivals would make. But they are creative with their accounts, Chelsea. But no, look, I mean, seriously though, they have got some prized assets, if you like. They've got players in that list who who would generate sales and get them into that positive balance on that List A group. So they can get there, but again, I think this final fortnight is going to be, or final 10 days is going to be extremely busy for a lot of clubs, and there'll be a lot of scrambling, and Chelsea will be right in there trying to sell, and then I think they'll try and do one or both of those deals very late in the window.
And on the playing front, James, what do you think goals have been set for Enzo Maresca this year? What's going to see the Chelsea board think, well, that was a relatively successful season? Because I know they've got a lot of young players, but they have spent a lot of money.
And they're the world champions, Craig.
In the last 3 years. So what do you think? What do you think the goals are for the ownership to be happy at the end of the season?
Champions League qualification this year, win the league next year.
There you go.
I think it's fairly clear. I think they'll expect a run at it this year. I mean, they had a sort of a run at it last year, didn't they? And they kind of fell away in the second half of the season, although I don't think anybody really took them seriously last season. I think if they can sustain that a little bit longer this season, safely stay in the top four, I think the style of football is still a little bit of an issue for Maresca. I think we can forget that at the back end of last season, some of the fans were still quite critical of the team and the way that they were playing, particularly at Stamford Bridge. He's bought himself obviously a lot more time with the end of the season and winning the Club World Cup. So I think that's a factor. But yeah, he's got to get Champions League qualification again and then put that team in a position to really go for it next year.
They're, of course, in search of their first win of the season. West Ham, of course, in the same position as the two face-off tomorrow.
Yeah, and West Ham started the season so desperately poorly. I was expecting a lot more, kind of given it's Graham Potter's first full pre-season with the squad. But I couldn't think of a more disastrous start than away to Sunderland than what we saw. I know there has to be a response. West Ham fans hate Chelsea as much as any club in the league. If this goes south for West Ham, I fear what's to come, certainly in the short term.
I'm just surprised that Graham Potter, who I've always thought is a pretty good manager, had his stock was knocked when he was at Chelsea, but I'm surprised. I know it's not the best squad, I know it's not the deepest squad, but I'm just surprised that the style of the football isn't much better than when David Moyes was there, and two, they look just much more open than they did, and he's not been able to have the impact on this West Ham squad thus far that I thought he was going to. I thought he was going to go in there and the whole sort of thing was going to change and it was going to be a bit of a revolution, but it's not been like that. And the one thing you can go back to with David Moyes is say, well, yeah, we can talk about the style of play and modern day football, but they were successful in their own little bubble. They had that European success. They were very difficult to play against. They were very difficult to beat. And sometimes you've got to choose your horse. And at the moment, I think West Ham are struggling to define what they are. At least with David Moyes, they knew what they were, and they were pretty damn good at it. With Graham Potter at the moment, I have no idea what kind of team they are. A team that tries to play out and outplay teams, or a team that wants to sit back. I've got no idea, and it's a big problem for him. He has to be one of the favourites to go early. Yeah. I'm not...
After that start, yes.
Yeah. James, what are you expecting?
Well, as Craig says, I mean, I have to say in my pre-season predictions, he was the manager I thought would go first, because I just... what would really worry me, I think, if I was a West Ham fan, was the second half against Sunderland, because once they conceded that first goal, they just folded. And the fight wasn't there, and the spaces were alarming, really. And you're thinking a newly promoted team away from home, first game of the season, you've really got to be making your mark there, and they were miles off it. And West Ham have been in this sort of existential conundrum for a while, haven't they? That when they've had the most success under the manager, that they least the team embodies. So, David Moyes is more a conservative, pragmatic manager. They want the West Ham way. They want to play entertaining, swashbuckling football. And every time they think they've got a manager who can do it, the idea doesn't translate. It seems to get lost. The squad either doesn't understand it, can't play it. They don't sign the right players for that style of football, and they get muddled. And then they think, oh, actually, are we in risk of going down here? Maybe we do need to revert to being a bit more pragmatic. And they get kind of caught in this cycle, don't they? And And I don't think Graham Potter's going to be able to get them out of it. They're just not enough signs for me, unless they're very positive and proactive again in the last sort of 10 days of the window. Kudus was obviously a huge loss to them. He's looked particularly good, I think, for Spurs right at the start of Tottenham's season. They need to replace him. They need more pace, more energy, more dynamism in the team. I am concerned for them, I have to say.